In the next group of slides, we will answer the question, how do we do test analysis in design thinking? To clarify, there are many ways to do data analysis. Since this is not a data analysis or a statistics class, this lesson will just focus on some simple ways to summarize, analyze, and reflect on the data that can be gathered from a usability test. With that being said, if you have other ways that you want to use to analyze your team's data for the project, I encourage you and your teams to do so. Please just discuss this with the professor if your methods are different than what is expected for your project report. The 3 steps of our usability test summary are: 1. Summarize the raw data. I'll show you 2 ways to display raw data for your reports. 2. Analyze the data. We will then discuss how to conduct very high-level analysis of both quantitative and qualitative data. I've color-coded these slides to differentiate the 2 types of data. Green is for quantitative and blue is for qualitative. And 3. Reflect on the data analysis. This includes discussing how the data analysis helped your team think about what you would add, remove, or change about your current mHelp app design. Let's first discuss how to summarize the raw data for your quantitative data. Remember that quantitative data includes any testing measurements that are numerical or can be quantified. This includes Likert scale questions, like the ones we discussed last class. It can also include measuring the amount of time it takes or the amount of clicks it takes for a user to complete a task. This is a great measurement if a goal of your app is to make the design as efficient as possible, meaning that the user can navigate it in as little time as needed. Another example of quantitative measurements are counting the amount of errors that were made during the test. This is also helpful if you have a more complicated design or one that maybe isn't as intuitive to the user. The amount of errors can help you identify points of confusion so that you can work on how to make those parts of your design better. There are, of course, a number of other quantitative data measurements, but these are ones that might be relevant to your app. How can we visualize quantitative data? For instance, like the Likert scale questions that we discussed last class. Here you can see examples that come from the iSleep survey that I created on Google Forms. The first question was asking about scenario 1. How useful is the journal function for users who want to improve the quality of their sleep? And I created a Likert scale with anchors not very useful that go all the way up to number 4 for very useful. Number 2 is another Likert scale question where I asked for scenario 2, how helpful do you think the TV challenge is for getting users to limit their screen time before bed? And again, I had a 1 through 4 Likert scale that ranged from not very helpful up to very helpful. So let's take a look at 2 ways that we could visualize this data in our final reports. The first way is to create a simple table with the raw data so that we can see each tester's rating across all of the questions. This can help us to see all of the data in one centralized place so that we can calculate some descriptive statistics like the mean, the median, and the mode. So here you can see I have the questions listed on the far left, and then each of the other columns are for each of our testers, 1, 2, 3, and 4. Now you can put the names of your testers in here, but sometimes as a good practice we tend to anonymize our testers so that they feel more comfortable being honest about their answers. So you can convert your testers' names into unique identifiers like this, tester 1, 2, 3, and 4. But here you can see on a scale of 1 to 4 how each of these testers rated the app. On question 1, usefulness of the journal, and question 2, helpfulness of the TV challenge. Again, the purpose of this is simply just to summarize this raw data. In the next stage, we'll start to make sense of it. Now, another way that we can visualize quantitative data, like Likert scale questions, is to visualize the data with a visual chart in order to see the distribution of ratings. If you used an online survey like Google Forms, at times they will create these visualizations automatically for you. So as you can see below, these are 2 screenshots that came directly from my Google Forms survey. This is quite helpful as a quick way to visualize the data. One thing I do want to mention though is you just want to make sure that you add any missing labels. If you notice at the bottom of these charts, they just list out 1, 2, 3, and 4. Those green labels where I added the Likert scale anchors from not very useful not useful, useful, and very useful, for question number 1, were labels that I added because they were missing from Google Forms. So if you do leverage these types of charts, which is a great way to just leverage what's already been done, just make sure you add in any missing labels so that we can fully understand the data. Now let's take a look at how we can summarize qualitative data, which, remember, are any testing measurements that include text-based data, usually allowing the tester to talk about their opinions or their ideas based on what they tested. This can include types of questions like open-ended questions or any other types of questions that the tester actually asked during the test itself. So if they were confused and asked, well, I'm not quite sure where I should click, right? This is a great type of question to log during the test as a qualitative data. There's also other types of qualitative data that you may have used or seen before, such as think aloud data. This is a type of qualitative measurement that we use that requests that the tester actually talk through how he or she walks through the task. So they'll read the scenario step and then say, okay, I'm going to click on the journal icon here to get to the journal screen. And now I'm going to click on this box, and yes, the checkbox appears. And then I'll click on 2 other boxes and then submit the form. So this thinking aloud data allows us to hear what's going on inside their head, so in case they get confused about where they're supposed to click, we can identify this as test facilitators. The last type of testing measurement for qualitative data might be a path analysis. Instead of having the user actually talk through how they walk through the task, we can observe this, sometimes through just an individual standing over their shoulder, or a camera or screen capture that actually watches where they click and how long it takes them to click in between different decisions. And we observe the path that the tester takes in order to execute the task to understand, again, their mental model, how they perceive where they're supposed to click based on the design of the app itself. As mentioned before, there's a lot of other types of testing measurements for qualitative data, just like with quantitative data. In our case, we spoke about one, which was the open-ended questions. So let's explore how we can summarize this type of raw data for your reports. Just to provide an example of a type of open-ended question that you might have as part of your survey would be like an example from my iSleep survey that I created on Google Forms, where question number 5 asked the tester, what did you like best about the app? Please explain why. And question number 6, what did you like least about the app? Please explain why. Let's take a look at how we can summarize these in 2 different ways. In order to summarize text-based questions like open-ended questions, we want to create a table with the raw data so that we can see each tester's answers across each of the questions. Now, sometimes this is helpful to include it with our quantitative data, as you can see in this visualization here. This way, we can see exactly what they rated the app on, for instance, question 1, usefulness of the journal, and question 2, helpfulness of the TV challenge, and then our question 5 is right below that, so that we can orient ourselves to how they felt about the app from a numerical standpoint, which can then help us better understand it by looking at their open-ended answers. However, sometimes if you have a lot of open-ended questions, it can create a table that's quite large and difficult to manage. So instead, you might want to actually create separate tables to look at the different types of qualitative data. In this case, the screenshot below, again, came directly from my Google Forms. It was a screenshot I took of Tester 1, Tester 2, Tester 3, and Tester 4's answers to question number 5. Just as with before, make sure that you add in any missing labels. For instance, in this case, Google Form does not add in which tester answered which question. So I made sure that I put these labels ahead of their answer so that I could keep each of the testers straight in my mind. And this, of course, again, is helpful because we want to know if a tester rated something low, that we know what their response was as to why they rated it low. So it's important to correlate the tester's ID with their answers. After you summarize the raw data, either using tables or visualized graphs, then we move into the analysis part. There are 3 basic steps to data analysis. The first is to perform descriptive statistics on that quantitative data. Things like what is the mean or the average? What's the median? What's the mode? Number 2 is to then compare the quantitative data questions to each other in order to start to identify trends and patterns in the data. And the last one focuses in on that qualitative data, the text-based data. This is where we review that type of data for insights that can answer why we are seeing those trends or patterns in the quantitative data. Let's walk through each of these steps with some of my data from the iSleep app. The first step in performing data analysis is to perform descriptive statistics on the quantitative data. These are simple measurements that you've probably done in statistics class or for other types of projects. You can calculate things like the mean, the median, and the mode to get a better sense of the quantitative data ratings. Just as a refresher, the mean is the average of all of the ratings for that question. So if you take a look at question number 1, where testers were rating the usefulness of the journal feature, this is essentially the sum of all of these ratings divided by the total number of testers. So we would have a 4 plus 3 plus 4 plus 4 divided by the 4 testers, which gives us a mean of 3.75 for that question. Now, the median is the middle number when we line up the numbers from the lowest to highest for that particular question. So if you look at question number 1, if we rate those from lowest to highest, it would be 3, 4, 4, 4, where the middle number is between that second and third number, those positions, which is essentially a 4. Now, we'll do one that's a little bit different for question number 2. If you line up those numbers, we have a 2, 2, 3, and 4. So the middle is between those second and third numbers, which is essentially a 2 and a 3. When that happens, when they're two different numbers, you just take the average of those two numbers. So if it's between 2 and 3, the median would be a 2.5. Now, the mode is the most commonly occurring number in the data set for that question. This type of descriptive statistic may not be as relevant if you have a very small data set, but you can still calculate it to see if it's on track with the mean and the median. In this case, for question number 1, 4 occurs the most amount of times, 3 times out of 4, so that is what the mode would be. So I encourage you to calculate the mean, the median, the mode, and any other types of descriptive statistics that you'd like for each of your quantitative data sets. Now, step number 2 in data analysis is to start to compare the quantitative data questions to each other so that we can start to identify trends or patterns that we're seeing in the data. When you take a look at my data here, I have 4 different trends or patterns that I'm seeing. The first is that when I look at question number 1, all of our testers, 100% of testers, found the journal function to be either useful or very useful. So this is a great finding because we didn't slip into the 2 or the 1 ratings, which are not useful or very not useful. Now, the second bullet point, looking at trends and patterns, talks about how the testers were divided on whether they found the TV challenge helpful, with 50% of our testers stating that it was not useful and 50% of our testers stating it was either useful or very useful. So again, this is a great way to discuss when you have testers that are giving conflicting ratings or opinions on some of the questions that you've provided to them. This is also where we'll start to explore why they're answering it this way in the next number 3 part of our data analysis when we combine it with our qualitative data. Now, bullet number 3 takes a look at question number 1 and question number 2, where we're looking at 2 different functionalities that we included in our mHealth app to allow the users to explore what this app might look like when we fully build it out. We took a look at the journal and we took a look at a TV challenge. Now, it turns out, based on our testers' responses, that the journal function is more highly rated on usefulness, with an average of a 3.75 out of 4, than the TV challenge is rated on helpfulness, which the average was a 2.75 out of 4, which was a complete number, 1 number drop from the 3.75. So this again is useful, especially when we talk about which functions the testers found helpful or useful in the overall design of our mHealth app. Clearly, they favored the journal function over the TV challenge. Now, our last bullet point about data analysis takes a look at how 75% of the testers found the prototype very easy to navigate. This again goes back to our question number 3, where the average was 3.75 out of 4. But they did rate it lower on having a visually pleasing design, where the average was a 3 out of 4. So again, when we compare navigation, ease of navigation, to kind of the visually appealing or aesthetics of the design itself, they clearly rated it higher on ease of navigation. So these are the types of basic trends or patterns that you can start to pick out just based on the quantitative data alone. And your averages, as well as the median and mode, can help you identify these patterns. So take a look at the differences between your functionalities, as well as things like ease of navigation or visual appeal. In the next step, number 3, we'll start to include the qualitative data. So the last step in our data analysis is to review the qualitative data, that text-based kind of opinions and ideas that were given by our testers, in order to gain insight into why we're seeing the different trends and patterns in the quantitative data. So here you can see just the standard table format that I created for question 5, what did the testers like best, and question 6, what did the testers like least. Now let's take a look at some of those bullet points from the previous step and look through the qualitative data to see if we can answer why our testers rated it that way. So you can see here on the bottom gray box, I put 100% of testers found the journal function useful or very useful. This was our first bullet point when we looked at the data analysis from the quantitative data. So as I start to go through the qualitative text-based data from our testers, I see some insight into why they found it useful or very useful. And then I write out a summary. So you can take a look at how I wrote this out in the gray box to understand how you can write this in your own reports. So they stated that they agreed that collecting data through the journal function, quote, would help identify bad habits. This came directly from tester number 1 if you look at the bolded part of their direct response up in the blue box. And it also helped them see patterns and trends, which came from tester number 2. I conclude kind of the summary and the insight into this bullet point by saying that one tester also commented on how simple and easy to use the text boxes were and suggested the ability for the user to add more text boxes and disable or delete any irrelevant boxes. And this came from tester number 4. So this is a great way to also include some of the suggestions that the testers gave, which we can then reflect on in the very last part of our data analysis. The second bullet point that I noticed in the quantitative data was that the testers were divided on whether they found the TV challenge helpful, with 50% stating it was not useful and 50% stating it was either useful or very useful. So as I go through my qualitative data here, I start to get some insight into why the testers are divided on this. As I state in the summary below, one tester stated that they found it very useful because Netflix is a huge problem for me. I don't go to bed until 3 a.m. But another did not understand why someone would voluntarily lock down their account and that a person could just turn off their own TV. So this again helps explain why there was a divide, whereas some personally resonated with the issue of not being able to turn off their TV until very late at night, whereas another thought that they don't really need an app to tell them to turn off their TV. Okay, the final one that I'll review is the one where 75% of the testers found the prototype easy to navigate, but they did rate it lower on having a visually pleasing design. I explain this by going through the data, as you can see with the bolded text in the blue areas, and I state that a tester did like how easy and simple the design of the app was, and specifically mentioned that the menu icons at the bottom of the screen were helpful. So this is very insightful because it reminds us that this is a feature, a design feature, that we should keep in order to keep it simple and easy for our users. However, another tester thought that the design was, quote, a bit basic. It should look more modern. Now, this may be a result of simply because this was a mid-fidelity prototype and something just designed in a PowerPoint screen, not something that's designed with an actual app development tool. But it's still something that we should keep in mind when it comes to designing these types of apps for the modern 20-year-old, which is something that we're targeting if you take a look at our persona, these working professionals in their 20s. Now, a different tester also commented on the inability to see the Data tab, which of course was out of scope for this mid-fidelity prototype, but it does provide insight into what exactly they do want to see. So perhaps in our next iteration of this prototype design, we should be building out that Data tab, since it is something that a tester explicitly said that they were interested in. After your team summarizes the raw data and performs some basic data analysis, your team should then reflect on the data analysis. In other words, what did you learn from your descriptive statistics and the explanations provided in your qualitative data set? Sometimes teams have a hard time getting started on their reflection, so here are a few questions to help you think about what this data means. Typically, mid-fidelity prototypes are meant to get some preliminary feedback in order to inform future designs of the app. So in this case, if you were to design a more detailed high-fidelity prototype, what would you change? What would you do differently? Take a look at these questions. Number 1, what parts of your app would you keep exactly as they are in an updated high-fidelity version of your prototype? Meaning, what worked really well and what did your testers really like? Always make sure you explain why by supporting your reflection with data from your data analysis. Second, what parts of your app would you change for a high-fidelity prototype? Meaning, what worked well but should be slightly improved the next time around? Again, explain why. Third, was there anything that you should eliminate from your high-fidelity prototype? Meaning, what did not work out well and should just be removed for any future version of the app? Again, explain why. And last, are there any new features that your team would add in the next version of this design? Perhaps this is an idea from your ideation phase that you want to include. Or maybe it was an idea that came up during testing, either a suggestion directly from a tester or an idea that popped into your team's minds as you were reviewing the data. Again, explain where the idea came from and why your team thinks it would be good to add. Then that is it. You've performed a basic data analysis of your testing data. You summarize the raw data and then perform some data analysis through descriptive statistics and data comparisons that helped you identify trends and patterns. You then paired your findings with the qualitative data set to provide insight into why those trends or patterns exist. Lastly, you reflected on what these findings mean in regards to your mHealth app design.